Elton Cash.
Look at this man. He's Elton Cash. He's a pop star. He's very rich and famous. Look at his house. It's large and expensive, and there's a swimming pool in the garden. There are 10 bedrooms in the house. Elton's car's American. It's a 1978 Lincoln Continental. It's fast and comfortable. In his car there's a radio, a stereo cassette player, a cocktail cabinet, a cigar lighter and electric windows. But Elton isn't happy. He'd like a Rolls Royce.
Wilson.
Look at this man. He's Mr. Wilson. He's a teacher. He's very poor and he isn't famous. Look at his house. It's small and cheap and there isn't a garden. There are only 2 bedrooms in the house. Mr. Wilson's car's English. It's a 1959 Mini. It's slow and uncomfortable. In his car, there isn't a radio or a cassette player. There's an engine, a steering wheel, and there are 4 wheels and 2 doors. Mr. Wilson isn't happy. He'd like a new Mini.
At the cinema.
Peter's standing outside the cinema. He's waiting for Lulu, his girlfriend, and he's looking at his watch because she's late. An old man's coming out of the cinema. A young man's going into the cinema. A boy's running up the steps. A woman's buying a ticket from the cashier. Some people are queuing outside the cinema. Now Peter's in the cinema with Lulu. He's sitting between Lulu and a man with a moustache. A lady's sitting in front of him. She's wearing a large hat. Peter can't see the film. A man's sitting behind Peter. He's smoking a pipe. Lulu's unhappy because the smoke's going into her eyes. This is a scene from the film. In this scene, a beautiful young girl's lying across the lines. She's shouting, "Help!" because the train's coming along the lines. It's very near. It's coming round the bend now.
An English wedding.
This is an English wedding. They're standing on the steps outside the church. The bride is wearing a long white dress and is holding some blue flowers in her left hand. The groom is wearing a traditional mourning suit and is holding a top hat in his right hand. They're both smiling because they're very happy. In a few minutes, they're going to get into a Rolls Royce and drive to a big hotel for the reception. At the reception, they're going to cut the cake and drink champagne. Then they're going to open all their presents. Some people are going to make speeches, and both of the mothers are going to cry. At 3 o'clock, they're going to leave the reception and drive to Heathrow Airport. They're going to fly to Bermuda. They're going to spend their honeymoon in a villa by the sea. They're going to be happy forever and ever and have a lot of children.
An accident.
2 cars were going along Cambridge Street. An Englishman was driving a Rolls Royce, and a foreign student was driving a VW. The Englishman was driving slowly and carefully. The student wasn't driving carefully. He was looking at a girl. She was walking along the street. She was wearing a short skirt and she was carrying a handbag. The traffic lights were green. A dog was sitting beside the traffic lights. A cat was sitting on the opposite corner.
4 lives.
Herbert Burke, James Stephens, Mary Foote and Charlie Phillips all went to the same school. They left school in 1960, and they've had very different careers.
Herbert Burke became a politician 10 years ago. He's very successful. He bought a country house 5 years ago and bought a Jaguar at the same time. He's been a Member of Parliament for 10 years. He's had his house and car for 5 years.
James Stevens is a criminal. He robbed a bank in 1971 and escaped to a Pacific island. He bought a luxury yacht the same year. He's still on the island. He's been there since 1971. He's had the yacht since 1971.
Mary Foote and Charlie Phillips fell in love at school. He gave her a ring when they left school. She wears it every day and she's never taken it off. They got married in 1963 and they are still in love. They moved to Australia in 1968.
Going to the zoo.
She goes to the zoo. She sees a lion. The lion roars. She sees an elephant. The elephant has a long trunk. She sees a turtle. The turtle is slow. She sees a rabbit. The rabbit has soft fur. She sees a gorilla. The gorilla is eating a banana.
4 disasters.
Hi, I'm Bill Daniels. I live in Chicago. I was working in my office on the 28th floor of a skyscraper. I was dictating some letters to my secretary when the fire bell rang. I rushed out to the lift, but it wasn't working. The stairs were full of thick smoke. We couldn't go down, so we had to go up to the roof. When we got there, some people were waiting calmly. Others were shouting and screaming wildly. A helicopter managed to land on the roof and rescued 6 of us before the building collapsed.
My name's Martha Huggins. I was on holiday in the South Pacific and I was staying on Pagohiti, a small island. I was having a rest when the volcano erupted. The noise woke me up. I looked through the window. Everybody was running towards the harbor. I just put on a coat and ran to the harbor too. I managed to get on a ship. It was leaving when the lava hit the town.
Hello, I'm George Green. I'm a farmer. I was working in the field behind my house when I saw the plane. It was on fire. Smoke was coming from the engines, and it was coming down fast. I was running towards my house when it crashed into the trees behind me. I heard a terrible explosion. When I woke up, I was lying in an hospital bed.
Good evening. My name's Michael Pert. My wife and I were staying with friends on Santa Monica in the Caribbean. We were having dinner when the earthquake began. Everything shook. All the plates and food fell onto the floor. We were picking everything up when the ceiling fell onto us. We couldn't move and we had to wait for 3 hours before help arrived.
A science fiction story. The spaceship flew around the new planet several times. The planet was blue and green. They couldn't see the surface of the planet because there were too many white clouds. The spaceship descended slowly through the clouds and landed in the middle of a green forest. The 2 astronauts put on their spacesuits, opened the door, climbed carefully down the ladder, and stepped onto the planet. The woman looked at a small control unit on her arm. "It's all right," she said to the man. "We can breathe the air. It's a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen." Both of them took off their helmets and breathed deeply. They looked at everything carefully. All the plants and animals looked new and strange. They couldn't find any intelligent life. After several hours, they returned to their spaceship. Everything looked normal. The man switched on the controls, but nothing happened. "Something's wrong," he said. "I don't understand. The engines aren't working." He switched on the computer, but that didn't work either. "Eve," he said, "we're stuck here. We can't take off." "Don't worry, Adam," she replied. "They'll rescue us soon."
Comparisons. Mr. and Mrs. Kent are old-age pensioners. They go to the shops every Saturday. They have to walk up a very steep hill between their house and the shops. They both walk slowly. Mr. Kent always has to wait for his wife at the top of the hill because Mrs. Kent walks more slowly than Mr. Kent. Diana and Margaret work in the same office. They're both good typists because they type carefully. Diana never makes a mistake, and Margaret rarely makes a mistake. Diana types more carefully than Margaret. Some drivers occasionally have accidents, but Alan and David are very careless drivers. Alan has already had 2 accidents this year, and David has had a lot. David drives even more carelessly than Alan. Both Carlos and Miguel are good students. They speak English well, but Miguel has spent a year in England, so he speaks English better than Carlos. Tyneside United and Humber Rovers are both near the bottom of the 4th Division. The football season has nearly finished, and Tyneside have won only 1 match. They've played very badly. Humber Rovers haven't won a match yet, and they haven't scored a goal. Humber have played even worse than Tyneside. Tony and Jim work for a construction company. They're very hard workers. They work about 12 hours a day. Tony often works at weekends. He earns more money than Jim because he works harder than Jim.
A family problem.
Flat 4, 185 Kings Road, Chelsea, London SW3, 5th of May 1979. Dear Daddy, thank you very much for the birthday present. I was very pleased with the Ferrari, but I didn't like the colour, so I'm going to change it. I saw Tom again yesterday. You're worried about him, aren't you? Well, don't worry about him. He's all right. He's very good at his job. He's a drummer in a pop group. I'm going to bring him for dinner next weekend so you can meet him. Love, Samantha. P.S. We love each other very much. He isn't interested in your money.
Dear Samantha, I'm sorry about last weekend. I was very angry with Tom, but he was very rude to me. I'm not a stupid old fool. I'm tired of long-haired young men. He didn't even dress for dinner. You love him, I know. I just feel sorry for you, and I'm worried about your future. Tom likes pop music. He isn't interested in anything else. He isn't interested in you at all. You're making a terrible mistake. And I'm glad he isn't interested in my money, because he isn't going to get any. Love, Daddy.
The Smuggler. Sam Lewis was a customs officer. He used to work in a small border town. It wasn't a busy town, and there wasn't much work. The road was usually very quiet, and there weren't many travellers. It wasn't a very interesting job, but Sam liked an easy life. About once a week, he used to meet an old man.
His name was Draper. He always used to arrive at the border early in the morning in a big truck. The truck was always empty. After a while, Sam became suspicious. He often used to search the truck, but he never found anything. One day, he asked Draper about his job. Draper laughed and said, "I'm a smuggler." Last year, Sam retired. He spent his savings on an expensive holiday. He flew to Bermuda and stayed in a luxury hotel. One day he was sitting by the pool, and opposite him he saw Draper drinking champagne. Sam walked over to him.
Hello there.
Hi.
Do you remember me?
Yes, of course I do. You're a customs officer.
I used to be, but I'm not anymore. I retired last month. I often used to search your truck.
But you never found anything.
No, I didn't. Can I ask you something?
Of course you can.
Were you a smuggler?
Of course I was.
But the truck was always empty. What were you smuggling?
Trucks.
Look.
Nick Owen is a guide for Britannia Tours. Some new tourists have just arrived in Exmouth. He's showing them around the town.
I'm sure you'll enjoy your stay here. There's the beach that's the safest for swimmers. The other beaches aren't as good. And that's the shop that sells picnic lunches. Over there's the shop that sells souvenirs. I'll meet you back here at 4 o'clock.
Paul's showing Angela some holiday photos.
Look, this is the hotel I stayed in, and here's the restaurant I used to go to. I used to eat there every day. This is the beach we used to lie on. It was a marvellous holiday.
Anne's just had an accident. She's telling a policeman about it.
The car in front of me stopped suddenly. I managed to stop, but the van behind me didn't. It hit my car and pushed it into the car in front. There's my car. There's the van that hit my car. And that's the car my car hit.
Paul's showing Angela an old school photo.
The headmaster's in the middle. He's the one that taught us Latin. His lessons were very boring. The fat one on the left is Mr. Bunter. He's the one that used to hit us with a cane. Mr. Cherry's on the right. He's the one that taught us French and football. I was never bored in his lessons.
This is a picture of Ronald Rigg. He's the man the police arrested yesterday. He's standing next to P.C. Martin. Martin's the policeman that caught him. A mugging. One night, Mrs. Riley, an elderly widow, was walking along a dark London street. She was carrying her handbag in one hand and a plastic carrier bag in the other. There was nobody else in the street except two youths. They were standing in a dark shop doorway. One of them was very tall with fair hair. The other was short and fat, with a beard and moustache. The youths waited for a few moments and then ran quickly and quietly towards Mrs. Riley. The tall youth held her from behind, while the other youth tried to snatch her handbag. Suddenly Mrs. Riley threw the tall youth over her shoulder. He crashed into the other youth, and they both landed on the ground. Without speaking, Mrs. Riley struck both of them on the head with her handbag, and walked calmly away. The two surprised youths were still sitting on the ground when Mrs. Riley crossed the street towards a door with a lighted sign above it. Mrs. Riley paused, turned round, smiled at the youths, and walked into the South West London Judo Club.
The 8 o'clock news.
Good evening, and here is the 8 o'clock news. Robert Gibbs, the great plane robber, has been caught in Montina. He was arrested in a Vanadello nightclub. He is being questioned at police headquarters, and he will probably be sent back to Britain. 2 British detectives left Heathrow earlier this evening and they will help the police in Vanadella with their inquiries. In 1978, Gibbs was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his part in the Great Plane robbery. He escaped from Parkwood Maximum Security Prison in April. Since then, he has been seen in 10 different countries. The strike at Fernside Engineering in Birmingham has ended after talks between trade union leaders and management representatives. The strike began last weekend after a worker had been sacked. He had had an argument with a supervisor. 5,000 men went on strike. The worker has now been re-employed. Vic Bostic, the lead guitarist of the Rats pop group, is dead. He was found unconscious in his Mayfair flat early this morning. Bostic was rushed to St. Swithin's Hospital, but doctors were unable to save his life. A number of bottles which had been found in his flat were taken away by the police. There is no more news about the famous Lanstable painting Norfolk Sunset, which was stolen last night from the National Gallery. The painting, which is worth £500,000, was given to the gallery in 1975. It hasn't been found yet, and all airports and ports are being watched. Cars and trucks are being searched. A reward of £10,000 has been offered for information. Jumbo, the Indian elephant which escaped from London Zoo this afternoon, has been caught. Jumbo was chased across Regent's Park and was finally captured at a hot dog stall in Regent's Park Road. A tranquilizer gun was used, and Jumbo was loaded onto a truck and was taken back to the zoo. At the zoo, he was examined by the zoo veterinary surgeon. Fortunately, no damage had been done, and Jumbo will be returned to the Elephant House later tonight. Jimmy McTavish, the Eastfield United and Scotland striker, has been transferred. The contract was signed at lunchtime. He was transferred to the American club Miami Galaxy for $3 million. McTavish, aged 23, was bought 2 years ago for a fee of £2,000 from a Scottish non-league club.
Elvis Presley, story of a superstar. When Elvis Presley died on the 16th of August 1977, radio and television programs all over the world were interrupted to give the news of his death. President Carter was asked to declare a day of national mourning. Carter said, "Elvis Presley changed the face of American popular culture. He was unique and irreplaceable." 80,000 people attended his funeral. The streets were jammed with cars, and Elvis Presley films were shown on television, and his records were played on the radio all day. In the year after his death, 100 million Presley LPs were sold. Elvis Presley was born on January the 8th, 1935, in Tupelo, Mississippi. His twin brother, Jesse Garon, died at birth. His parents were very poor, and Elvis never had music lessons. But he was surrounded by music from an early age. His parents were very religious, and Elvis regularly sang at church services. In 1948, when he was 13, his family moved to Memphis, Tennessee. He left school in 1953 and got a job as a truck driver. In the summer of 1953, Elvis paid $4 and recorded 2 songs for his mother's birthday at Sam Phillips' Sun Record Studio. Sam Phillips heard Elvis and asked him to record That's All Right in July 1954. 20,000 copies were sold, mainly in and around Memphis. He made 5 more records for Sun, and in July 1955 he met Colonel Tom Parker, who became his manager in November. Parker sold Elvis's contract to RCA Records. Sun Records got $35,000, and Elvis got $5,000. With the money, he bought a pink Cadillac for his mother. On January the 10th, 1956, Elvis recorded Heartbreak Hotel, and 1 million copies were sold. In the next 14 months, he made another 14 records, and they were all big hits. In 1956, he also made his first film in Hollywood. In March 1958, Elvis had to join the army. He wanted to be an ordinary soldier. When his hair was cut, thousands of women cried.
He spent the next 2 years in Germany, where he met Priscilla Bewley, who became his wife 8 years later on May the 1st, 1967. In 1960, he left the army and went to Hollywood, where he made several films during the next few years. By 1968, many people had become tired of Elvis. He hadn't performed live since 1960, but he recorded a new LP, From Elvis in Memphis, and appeared in a special television program. He became popular again and went to Las Vegas, where he was paid $750,000 for 4 weeks. In 1972, his wife left him, and they were divorced in October 1973. He died from a heart attack. He'd been working too hard and eating and drinking too much for several years. He left all his money to his only daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. She became one of the richest people in the world when she was only 9 years old. The Appointment. Once upon a time, there was a rich caliph in Baghdad. He was very famous because he was wise and kind. One morning he sent his servant, Abdul, to the market to buy some fruit. As Abdul was walking through the market, he suddenly felt very cold. He knew that somebody was behind him. He turned round and saw a tall man, dressed in black. He couldn't see the man's face, only his eyes. The man was staring at him, and Abdul began to shiver. "Who are you? What do you want?" Abdul asked. The man in black didn't reply. "What's your name?" Abdul asked nervously. "I am Death," the stranger replied coldly, and turned away. Abdul dropped his basket and ran all the way back to the caliph's house. He rushed into the caliph's room. "Excuse me, master, I have to leave Baghdad immediately," Abdul said. "But why? What's happened?" the caliph asked. "I've just met Death in the market," Abdul replied. "Are you certain?" said the caliph. "Yes, I'm certain. He was dressed in black, and he stared at me. I'm going to my father's house in Samara. If I go at once, I'll be there before sunset." The caliph could see that Abdul was terrified, and gave him permission to go to Samara. The caliph was puzzled. He was fond of Abdul, and he was angry because Abdul had been badly frightened by the stranger in the market. He decided to go to the market and investigate. When he found the man in black, he spoke to him angrily. "Why did you frighten my servant?" "Who is your servant?" the stranger replied. "His name is Abdul," answered the caliph. "I didn't want to frighten him. I was just surprised to see him in Baghdad." "Why were you surprised?" the caliph asked. "I was surprised because I've got an appointment with him tonight in Samara."